First of all, thanks very much for coming, and thanks also to Graham Eatough to be here. So unfortunately, Graham Fagen is not feeling well today, so he's not here.
So he really wanted to be here.
He even postponed his holiday, for this talk, but then he didn't feel well, so he couldn't come. So it's supposed to be a conversation between two Grahams and also between them with the audience. So I don't think the nature would change. So it's still a conversation between the artist and us.
Okay.
So I'm going to take on the role of the facilitator. And so I'm not the artist, the artist is this one. You probably also recognize Graham just now in the films, if anybody could recognize someone's hovering around. And Graham Fagen actually was in the film too. So Graham Fagen and Graham Eatough, one of the 4 collaborative groups featured in studio jamming. The works that we put on for studio jamming is Killing Time, which was made in 2006 at DCA. So this week is Graham Eatough and Graham Fagen collaborations hub week. So it's how we composed this studio jamming, this project. So each artist group will take over the gallery for 1 week to deliver whatever they would like to, events or special works made for the hub week. So for this week, apart from the film installation of Killing Time, we also put up the sketches and notes made during the production of Killing Time. So you probably also see on the planes, we actually had a reproduction of those drawings and the notes, but also on the walls, the original drawings and the notes. Because originally the plan was a conversation between 2 Grahams and then between the audience, but now it's a little bit shifted. So I think I could start this conversation between Graham Eatough and with all of us with one question. But I should briefly introduce Graham Eatough first. Graham Eatough is a theatre director and also the co-founder and director of Suspect Culture, and was founded in '92. Graham Eatough is also occasionally an actor, but right now is a PhD candidate at Lancaster University. It's on the AHRC funded PhD, which examines what you call the theatre turn in visual arts.
Theatrical turn.
Theatrical turn in visual arts. So that probably says a lot about this collaboration between Graham Eatough and Graham Fagen. So I think most people here are quite familiar with Graham Fagen's practice because Graham Fagen is a senior lecturer at Dundee and he was a visual artist. But I know you're engaged in visual arts world quite a lot. So that's not only through the collaboration with Graham Fagen. So probably we could start with the question of how do you see your role as a theatre director in the visual arts world?
Gosh. Well, we make stuff, we make work, so I suppose we tend to share it quite evenly when we're conceptualizing the work. This is with Graham, it's different with different people, and I've done solo work in visual arts as well. But with Graham, we don't really think at the beginning of a project, we wouldn't really think about that I was a theatre director and that he was an artist. We would just try and have a good idea or respond to a brief or respond to a situation. And then I guess as the process goes on, we might start to look at certain areas of work individually. So if the project involves performance, which most of them do, I would probably look after that side of things a bit more, and Graham might look after the structures a bit more, or the sets, or the. But to be honest, we try and share it quite evenly. So I don't know really. It's a kind of strange balance between trying to play to our strengths and make the most of our disciplines. And obviously, I'm from theatre and he's from visual art, so we try and make that count for something, allow that to enrich the work somehow. But at the same time, I think there's a certain amount of ignoring those titles, because I would still want Graham's opinion and input on the direction of a scene or the casting, and he would still want my input on the materials that go into a structure. So it's a kind of balance between paying attention to those disciplinary practices and trying not to let them get in the way of a sort of full collaboration.
Right.
But I guess more generally, I suppose I've been lucky in some ways in that I think there has been, as far as I can make out from a slightly outsider's perspective, there has been more generally in the visual arts a real proliferation of work that seems inspired by or somehow to deal with elements of theatricality. I think it's quite ill-defined and quite kind of broad-ranging, that interaction between the disciplines. But it seems to have been quite a noticeable thing over the past, I don't know, 15, 20 years maybe. And so I suppose that's been interesting for me, because I'm very interested in both disciplines and in how they relate to each other. And I've tried to create work for both disciplines that somehow refers to the other. So somewhere in between, I guess, to answer your question, somewhere in between the two, probably.
Okay, that's great. And then I've got another question. So we know so far you've collaborated on two quite large scale projects, both projects quite large scale. So one is Killing Time, which is on show here in 2006. And then another one is a screening of the film we just watched, The Making of Us, that was 2 years ago. So how did this collaboration start?
Right, well, it was really Katrina Brown, who used to be director at Dundee Contemporary Arts. She and I, by coincidence, were on a sort of residency at Cove Park at the same time, which must have been, I don't know, 2004 or even earlier actually. And we just got talking about mutual interests really, and I was kind of talking about my interest in visual arts and sort of Scottish visual arts in particular, and we were talking about that this very idea of theatricality becoming more of a subject matter or a resource maybe for visual arts, and we kind of thought it might be interesting to do something together, and so she very quickly had the idea of introducing me to Graham Fagen, who she knew had a pre-existing interest in theatre. So Graham's always, I think, been interested in certain aspects of theatre. He made a piece called Theatre when he was war artist in Kosovo. The piece that resulted from that was called Theatre, and sort of referred to the theatre as a stage, but also the kind of theatre of war, and had a videoed performance within it. So she sort of knew about his interest in theatre, and she knew about my interest in visual art, and she kind of put us together really, introduced us, and we had a further sort of time together, all together at Cove Park, and seemed to find areas of mutual interest, and that led to a commission from DCA, which resulted in Killing Time.
So did you work on the script together as well?
Yeah, we did. Probably we worked on the script for that one more together than we did for this one. I think Killing Time, because it was the first project, we were probably trying to sort of feel our way into a way of working. And sort of find out what each other was comfortable with and where was good to be very democratic and share everything and where was good not to be very democratic. And I suppose that was a process of finding that out, really. But yeah, we did. I mean, even for this, although it sort of says I wrote it, the story ideas were all done collaboratively. And we would kind of work together on what the main aspects of the story were, but the actual sort of scripting of it was more me with this one, just as the actual design of the space was probably more Graham. But it's, I mean, I think of it as a genuine collaboration, really. It's quite even in that way.
It's quite interesting, actually, this collaborative group, among all the 4 groups, they are cross-disciplinary collaboration, if we put it that way. And also for studio jamming, what we're interested to focus on as a project, we wanted to foreground the idea of the process and the practice in contemporary art rather than the final works, how to showcase the final work. But then it's interesting to watch the making of us just now, and also to read through the catalog of Killing Time. And it showed actually both projects really during the making of it, it really foregrounded the process of making in both projects. So I don't know any of you knew about Killing Time at DCA. I wasn't in Dundee then, but when I read through the catalog, I realized actually it was an exhibition.
Yes.
And it was almost like a performance installation,
That's right.
if I could describe it that way. And so could you tell us a little bit about what happened at DCA?
Yeah, I mean, I guess in a way, that idea of process, I mean, well, I'll start with DCA and then talk about the making of us. So DCA, it was the Killing Time was a performance installation, I suppose you would call it, where we had the 2 sort of spaces at DCA, and the small space was a video installation, and the video was 5 kind of projection screens which correspond to these screens here, and they were all shot on sets that we built in the main gallery of DCA, and all those sets related more or less to iconic theatre texts. So there was a sort of Cherry Orchard set, our interpretation of a Cherry Orchard set, Waiting for Godot, Look Back in Anger, The Dumbwaiter, Harold Pinter's The Dumbwaiter, and another one. The Entertainer by John Osborne. So in the main space, there were these sort of 5 theatre sets, and we shot a film in there, quite a simple narrative of this Harlequin character, so a guy dressed initially in a Harlequin costume, who sort of moved from set to set and encountered the characters from those different sets and sort of disrupted those narratives and those situations as he travelled around the gallery from set to set. And then, so we showed those films in the small room in DCA, and then as you walked through into the bigger gallery, there were the sets and there were the performers on the sets, and it wasn't quite clear whether this was the sort of aftermath of what you've seen on film or whether that was about to happen. And the whole show sort of played with those ideas of time and story, I suppose. So yeah, it wasn't, this video work was one part of that. And so it's interesting that you say sort of process, because in a way, the process was ongoing, so the performance continued through the whole duration of that exhibition. So whenever you came into the gallery, you could see the video work and then some performers on the different sets around the space. And then this was made in a slightly different way. So this was made over the opening weekend of Glasgow International 2012, and there were 4 performances in total. We shot some rehearsals as well, which some of that footage is in there, but mainly it was the 4 public performances with the audience there. And we invited an audience in to kind of participate in, as you can see really, they're an audience, but they also had to sign release forms to allow us to use their their image in the piece. And so we had the opening weekend, which was the filming weekend, and then the sets existed as an installation in Tramway for the rest of GI, for the other 3 weeks. But not with live performers, but with the rushes of the film that were on the monitors that were positioned around the space. So we had a monitor for each of those set areas, and on that monitor would be the rushes for the footage for that set. Does that make sense? So yeah, I guess the process becomes part of the exhibition, really, in both shows in different ways.
I was in Glasgow at one of those 4 nights, but I was observing how that collaboration would take place. Because that's when I had this idea to invite you to take part of this exhibition. But I didn't notice, actually, I didn't see, to be honest, if you two discussed anything or talked. Everything was just, carrying on, rolling on itself. And then I saw Graham Fagen came along, actually behaved like a technician. He was mainly just pushing the props around, and then you occasionally would tell the cameraman what to do. So I didn't really say, I was hoping there would be a moment of a discussion, conversation, dialogues, and decision making. But then I actually didn't notice anything.
Well, I mean, it's all, I slightly hesitate to say this, but it's not contrived. It's a real filmmaking process. So although we're all conscious of being on camera and there's no denying the kind of different layers of it, we had a certain amount of material to shoot in a very short amount of time. And on any film set, it is a machine, Everybody has their role, and you have to perform your role sort of kind of concisely. And there sometimes is reference to other people, but that usually happens beforehand.
Yeah.
When you're actually on set, it's, as the cliche goes, every sort of second is money, really. So you don't have a lot of time for collaboration. Or, I mean, in our case, it was a performance duration that limited the time. So yeah, I don't think we weren't really performing the collaboration. If we were performing anything, it was the making of a film,
Okay, that's interesting. On that note, I would like to ask you another question. So if we see this collaboration as a whole body of a practice, so how would you answer this question? Where does the collaboration start and where does the collaboration end?
Gosh. The whole thing feels pretty collaborative to me. So, Graham would have been here tonight if he hadn't been ill. And we were there right at the beginning, and I don't think it's sort of particularly. It doesn't end at a point in time. I think there are certain points in the process where, so casting is a good example. Nobody really, even in film or theatre, likes casting. It's kind of fairly horrible process, and when we were doing a show in Marseille in August, and we were there in June, and it was interesting how that prep week broke down, because we had to cast the thing, and I kind of went off and did that, and Graham would obviously have reference to that, and we'd talk about it, but he was off with the ceramic, the ceramicists, organising how some of the sculptural work would be made for the same show. So I suppose at that point the collaboration kind of becomes more individual, and I'll concentrate on the things that I'm supposed to know about, and he concentrates on the things he's supposed to know about. But always with reference to each other, I think. I think it would be very hard to separate completely the functions of, I don't know, theatre or performance or even filmmaking. That's an interesting thing, actually, which is worth saying, is that film is really important because it's kind of a meeting place for both of our practices. So I'd worked a lot with film in theatre, and also made film in sort of short and long format. And Graham's worked a lot, like most contemporary artists, have worked a lot with film in his practice. Yeah. So in a way, that was a good collaborative space for us. And it's interesting that all the projects we've done have involved film. Yeah. Because I guess that's where we come together, really.
Okay. Now probably we should talk about the content of both projects and perhaps even your forthcoming project in Marseille as well. I've noticed there's a kind of concurrent theme in both production, which is the place and the time. That's quite interesting. Although I think in Killing Time, it's very, very obvious. But then in this, The Making of Us, I was quite interested, I was quite struck just now when I watched the film, this experience of a situation. And you see audience around of the scene, the film set. But then you're not really sure which part is a fiction, which part is a reality. And you have a very strong sense of experience emotionally, but also almost personally I felt I wished I believed that was the truth.
You believed
that I wish I believed this is the real thing. But then also when you watch the people around it, and then you know that's fictional. So it's quite interesting to me. This is almost like how contemporary art would do. It shows a lot of good contemporary art works actually point out reflexivity in the work. But then when you are going to a kind of purely, just theatrical works, so you know that theatrical, but then at that moment, you put yourself in that theatrical situation. But then in contemporary art, the artist always trying to point out the fictionality of the work. I think in The Making of Us, in that film, actually, you have the both. It's quite interesting experience when you watch the film.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I'm glad you said that, because I always think it's very difficult to sort of talk about certain aspects are real and certain aspects are fictional or fake or theatrical. It's something I think that's a really interesting thing about visual. I think the visual art world is more comfortable with those broad terms, actually, that something's real and something's theatrical. And I think part of the starting point for us maybe is to try and throw those terms into question a little bit. So, in terms of reality, just on a straightforward level, the audience is really there. They're really an audience. They're not, we weren't sort of telling them what to do, and we are really making a film. There wasn't any contrivance around that. We're being filmed making the film, but there was a very clear, especially for the crew actually, as there is with any shoot, there's a really clear schedule of work, which is sort of, it becomes performed because it's being shot with documentary cameras, but actually it's as real for them probably as any shoot they would do. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's, I hope that what the film does is ask questions about those kind of definitions, really.
So the whole situation actually is pointing out the question as well. I think that's quite interesting. And also because you're from a theater background, so if I just borrow the phrase, the term from Brecht about breaking the fourth wall, I think that's what it did in The Making of Us. But then a lot of contemporary art artists, try to do that all the time. Through their work, they try to point out what they're questioning about. And I think The Making of Us probably really did the job. So I don't know what other audience today here would feel about it, and how you, what's your reflection on that film, and how the film's made in that sort of a situation.
I had this kind of simple, I started to really feel, not watched in my situation here, but that feeling of being watched in various situations, and I started thinking, what's the I started thinking like what the difference of watching it now post like the NSA releases of all the files and thinking about it within like a wider like global context and that idea of like surveillance and when I watched as well, so everyone was aware that they were stepping into this film set as being problematic, but as you kind of see the progression of the protagonist as he becomes like a citizen and how he goes from being aware of being watched and then not being aware of like, the role play that happens between them. It's not really a question, but it's just like that awareness for us as individuals within this wider context.
That was an important part of it for us really, was this idea of, it was a lot to do with the release form, which is the consent form, which again, you sort of, you know, it was a real thing, we had to have that. You can't film people and use their image unless you have their consent. So that was a kind of, as those opening shots portray, that was an important part of people coming into the space and into the experience, I suppose, was signing this consent form, which is very, in film, it's a very sort of mundane sort of thing that you have to do. But we wanted to make that part of the narrative in a way. So, so Jonathan, the protagonist, has this, the form features in each of the scenes to a lesser and greater degree, whether it's him signing it at the bar, like the rest of the audience have been asked to do, or it being this kind of Faustian contract that he signs with Michael, with the character in the second scene, and then it becomes this in the scene when he's in the dressing gown preparing to go on set. It becomes this briefing sheet from the sort of PR people of a film. So at each point, that consent form, and it was the same yellow form physically that the audience had all signed. It becomes part of the narrative of how we sign away our rights, I suppose, to a performance of ourselves or to our image. And what it is we're sort of agreeing to give away when we enter these types of situations. And I think you're right, I think that probably happens quite a lot. I mean, the filmmaking version of it, where you're asked to sign a release form, is a very kind of literal version. But I think at lots of points during the day, actually, we're probably, in a way, we're sort of consenting to information, or it's sort of ideas of ourself, isn't it? It's ideas of ourself that we give out to the world, and they become captured in some sort of way and used, whether that's on Facebook or, you know, being filmed or a photograph or whatever. So I think that was an important part of the narrative for us, was that idea of, I think it was being framed, actually, that he kind of gets framed. And I think that's a useful word in terms of the whole thing, really.
And also I was thinking about this idea of, you know, it's a very common phrase now, the visual culture, and how we experience the culture and the situation around us. When you look at the audience in the making of us, you know, I think most 100% people, they're very comfortable with the situation.
Yeah.
Nobody felt any, you know, awkwardness about it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess some people probably did, but yeah, not so you'd notice. No, no, that is interesting. I mean, I think there was a kind of contract, there was an offer to the audience, which was part of the pre-publicity and marketing, which made it really clear that you were going to come and be filmed. So I suppose if you're in the room, you have some expectation of that. I mean, we wanted to develop this idea. I'm not sure how developed it is in the film, but we wanted to play with this idea of complicity, really. So if Jonathan is getting sort of drawn into something, sort of getting eaten up by this machine, that the audience is somehow complicit in that, even just by being spectators of it, you know, however passive. And I suppose particularly that's writ large with the hanging, when there's you know, I suppose the parallel would be like a kind of mob, really. Yeah.
And I was observing, you know, all the audience expressions at the beginning, you know, when the assistant starts brought through the news, and some lady around the scene, and she was smiling. Everybody thought that's funny. And then at the end, I noticed that your cameraman had a few close-up shots, and everybody's face, the expression changed, and the heaviness in the air. You felt that kind of. It's not only about audience being complacent. It's about the emotional charge there as well.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting moment for me, because it's clearly fake. That is a moment, I think, where nobody's under any illusions,
Yeah.
But there is something still quite sort of, especially live. I mean, I hope it comes across in the film, but especially live, there's something quite shocking just about that image and the power of that image, even though it's, and we don't try and hide it. There was a guy with the rope sort of holding him up.
That's why it's quite powerful. Everybody knows how it's made, that image, but still it's got that kind of impact on people. And how did it end at the end? How did that?
So then he gets lowered down and takes it off, and there was a kind of more theatrical ending where, not at our prompting, there was sort of applause, and we didn't really want to show that on the film, but it sort of was at the end of the show, so the audience kind of treated it like that.
It would be quite interesting to see how audience responded to that after he's been released from the tree.
Yeah, it was a sort of relief, I suppose, even though he's obviously fine. It was there's a laughter, isn't there, that comes with, oh right, it's all over and he's fine, and it's a pretense, Yeah, but I suppose that's interesting to me. So what is that emotion then? Is that real? That feeling of shock, even though it's being prompted by something that's completely artificial,
Yeah, it's quite interesting. That goes back to, I know it's a completely different thing, but it goes back to the title of the film, The Making of Us. When I was observing all the audience, when I watched this film, I was watching the audience in the film. And then I kept thinking about this title, The Making of Us. What's made us today? With all this imagery, overly charged worlds, and with all this information around us. And would that have a particular impacts on our emotional responses to the world around us? And how, or if that's had an impact on how we interpret the society, the place, the time, all these, concepts in your projects as well. It's quite interesting.
There was an idea of Jonathan, the character, as a kind of everyman. We talked a lot about that, actually, when we were first kind of coming up with the project. And that, I suppose just that he would somehow hold, in the form of his character, he would hold a lot of those ideas, of more universal ideas of what do people aspire to achieve, and what does it mean to make it, obviously his is a very particular journey, but it was supposed to be somehow emblematic, I suppose.
So I'm just looking at all these drawings over there. I remember when we started talking about how we would realize this project for studio jamming, and I kept focusing on this idea of a process, and then eventually, I think Graham Fagen forgot about this. Yeah,
I'd forgotten about them. Yeah,
forgot as well. Yeah. And then eventually we discovered them from somewhere in Graham Fagen's studio. So now when you're looking at them, could you remember all this process of making of this?
Yeah, it's quite familiar to me. I don't know, maybe it's not so usual in visual art, but in theatre, you would probably go through a lot of these pads of paper and different iterations of an idea. I guess theatre is inherently collaborative in a way that maybe sometimes visual art pretends not to be. But so there's a lot of this. There's a lot of trying to discuss an idea with the other people involved and get it down on paper in a list or a drawing, and it's lovely to be able to come back to it and you sort of remember the different versions that got left behind, actually, before you reach the final idea.
Some ideas you probably used for the film.
Yeah, there's lots in there, but there's some that
of
isn't.
them probably you didn't use.
Or it's interesting, you sort of forget the reference points or the sort of inspirations behind things. So Killing Time, the Cherry Orchard set, for example, the country house, which is kind of on this backdrop, this curtains backdrop at the back of the set for the Cherry Orchard scene, is Hofty House, where Reagan and Gorbachev signed the nuclear disarmament pact. That, you know, in Finland, I think it's Finland. Is it Finland or Iceland? Iceland, is it? Huh? It is on one of the drawings. Yeah, well, I'd sort of forgotten because obviously I'm so used to seeing that image, and to me it's the Cherry Orchard set, you know, or our kind of slightly DIY version of it. And then I sort of remembered where all that came from, and this idea of kind of authority and the Cold War, and yeah, that was fascinating. Being reminded of sort of where ideas have sort of been inspired from, I guess. And, yeah.
So do you think because Graham Fagen's not here, so I'm not just asking you this question, do you think this collaborative process actually did something to your practice as a theatre director?
Gosh, I'm sure it must have done. Yeah, I probably couldn't pinpoint exactly where. I mean, I've sort of been involved with visual arts in a few different ways, but this has been certainly the most rigorous, I suppose, or ongoing. Has it affected my theatre directing? Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, there's certain things that happen in visual arts, both positive and negative, that are very different to how things are done in theatre. And I guess you try and take some of the positive back. And I would hope that's the same for Graham as well with his practice, is that he's, yeah. Hello.
Can I ask about your PhD, what you're actually researching, because it is about the, I don't know exactly how you put it, the question, and I was wondering what happens to theatre.
Yeah.
Leaves the theatre and kind of enters new territories, and why would visual arts be interested in taking theatre in? What happens there?
Yeah.
I guess that's something you're exploring.
It is, very much so, yeah. So it's a practices research PhD, so it's to do with these projects. In fact, not this one, The Making of Us is one of the projects. So, where to begin? I think visual art, contemporary visual art is kind of voracious from my point of view. This is all my very subjective, anecdotal opinions. But it sort of somehow, perhaps more in the past 30 years than before, that's open for debate, it kind of needs different, not just subject matters, but kind of forms really to feed on and interpret and, you know, in a more positive way, inspire the work. And so I suppose sometimes I wonder whether theatre and the really marked proliferation of work that is about theatre somehow, whether it's not part of that process really of devouring different sort of source materials somehow. There's another thing which I think is really interesting, is that it's because of what most people perceive as a traditional anti-theatricality within the visual arts. So, you know, Freed famously said that art degenerates as it approaches the condition of theatre, this 60s bit of modernist sort of criticism. And that I think is still quite a predominant view in many different corners, actually, of visual art, is that theatre is somehow fake and visual art is, obviously I'm really crassly generalising, but a modernist approach to visual art is that it's searching for truth, and that theatre can't give you truth because they're all pretending and they're all... So, the current theatrical turn, I think there's a way in which it's self-consciously perverse, really. It's a kind of reaction to that orthodoxy of anti-theatricality. So, you know, and for me that's quite characteristic of visual art, again from my outsider's perspective, is that it sort of swings to, right, what's the opposite thing that we can do to what people expect us to do, or to what's been done before. And I sometimes think theatricality stands in for that. The people who are the clearest sort of exponents of modernist anti-theatricality within the visual arts, for me, are the performance artists. So if you think of Abramovich, Marina Abramovich famously talks about theatre as the enemy, you know. When she cuts herself, the blood is real. When people in the theatre cut themselves, it's fake blood. I mean, I couldn't be further away from those ideas. But that was, I think, and probably still is to a certain extent, I don't know, I mean, you probably all have active experience of that, but to me that seems a kind of orthodoxy within visual art, kind of discourse, if you like, is this quite anti-theatrical, Platonic, I would call it. It's the same thing that Plato was talking about when he, you know, slagged off the actors and mimesis and all of that. So the theatrical turn is in some way a reaction to that mainstream modernist thrust. Discuss.
Because I agree, but so that takes us back, because I thought that the work, by becoming a screen, by becoming a film, reinforces the fourth wall. So it actually does, I mean, it's good to hear you say that, because it sort of takes theatricality and takes it away from the live experience, the performance, and turns it into a kind of screen memory, effectively.
Yeah.
A false memory. So I'm interested in the experience that I have, not having been part of that live experience, how you see it as is this the work?
Yeah, right.
Or is it actually an experiential dissonance within the experience and then this screen memory?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because in a way this becomes the artifact, and it's in those classic visual art terms, this is the work that persists. So this gets shown in festivals and whatever, and here, but it's really interesting from my point of view. I suppose it's easier for me to think of that opening weekend of performances as the work, because in traditional theatre terms, they were the performances, and this is a kind of document of it. It's not quite that simple, and it was part of our aspiration, slightly lofty, you might say, to make a work that existed and that was somehow coherent in sort of three different forms. In the theatrical performance, in the installation, which it also was. I mean, it was, a lot of people just experienced it as the 3-week exhibition in Tramway 1, and then as the film work. And so we set ourselves this task, I suppose, of trying to create something that, if you just saw the film, it would kind of work as a film somehow. If you just saw the performance, it would work as a performance. If you just saw the installation. And yet, none of those three things could exist without the other. That was the kind of challenge we set ourselves, really. So I agree, this, I think, is quite comfortable in a visual art context, because it is finished and definable and a bit of an artifact, the film. It's kind of common currency, isn't it, in visual arts? And the performance, I guess, was a bit more challenging. But for theatre people, many of those people who were there that night, they were theatre people. It was a National Theatre of Scotland co-production. So they've seen the film, and they kind of like it as a film of a performance. But that's what it is for them. Yeah. It's the film of a performance. And that, I find that really interesting. That's sort of where I am, really. That's the thing I like to explore, I suppose.
First thing effect when you came to Eatough.
I don't want to destroy the studio mice and, what is it, mice and Meeson? I know, yeah, breaking the fourth wall.
Just in terms of you talking about them as these three sort of entities that someone could then react to, but then when you came to actually finalising what is the film that we saw here today, and obviously you were talking earlier on about things like choosing not to put in the final clip of when the
applause
down and clapping. How did you find that decision-making process? Was it quite clear and
I suppose we always had a bit of an eye on that because we knew this was going to be an output, just as we had to have an eye on it being a coherent theatre performance in our terms. We always knew it was going to be, so just as you would when you're making any film, you sort of your head's a bit in the edit and how it's going to cut together. But we worked with an editor, we worked with one of Scotland's best, kind of film editors, Colin Money, and he, as editors do, they try and find a story through it, and they, they'll suggest you, right, if you cut it together like this, then people will see these connections. And so I suppose, again, it's a bit like the whole film, really. There's this sort of machine that you get caught up in, and I was quite happy about that, really. That was sort of part of the game of it, was following through on those industry processes. Yeah. So, yeah, we had quite a lot of material, although not as much as you would for a normal shoot, I guess. Like, it was, we did the show 4 times, so we shot each scene 4 times in those different performances, and that corresponded to what you would do in a normal film, which was you would reset 4 times at least to film a scene. So that was quite bizarre, but it basically got us to roughly the same point as if we'd have shot it conventionally in terms of material. Probably overall we had a bit less material than you would have. We had the documentary footage, which Holger shot, as well as the Alexa footage. So there were these big sort of film cameras, and then there was these kind of things. And then, yeah, you just kind of cut it together. You've got the script, so you follow that to a certain extent. That's probably your starting point in the edit. And then make decisions as you go along with the editor, really.
Did the audience know the script?
No, they didn't. No, they were completely...
So you left at the end of the film, we felt as uncomfortable as the audience.
If you did, yeah.
In first split second.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, in a way, it's quite... it was quite an unusual live experience, because so this is 48 minutes, and the show wasn't that... I mean, it was like an hour and 10, hour and 15. So it wasn't that much longer, but the in-between bits, the bits in between the scenes, were a bit longer. And so there were these lulls, which is really true to, if you've ever been on a film set, it's really true to what it feels like. There were these incredible moments of intensity where everybody's dead quiet and you've got to shoot the thing and it's all about that. And then everybody kind of breathes and moves around, and, we had a bar. That was a proper functioning bar, so people went and got a drink. And the story is so fragmented, like we didn't, rightly or wrongly, we didn't want to portray a kind of linear, joined up, it is linear, but it's not joined up narrative, so it sort of jumps ahead. And that was supposed to, in a way, correspond to another experience of being on film set, which is things get filmed in different orders, So particularly for the actors, they could be filming the ending before they film the beginning, and just these sort of, it is a fragmentary experience, really, the experience of making a film, in narrative terms, and we wanted to convey that a little bit in how the thing was put together. So yeah, I think they were probably as flummoxed as everybody else, yeah.
Did you have different audiences every time?
Yeah, there's absolutely no continuity whatsoever in that film.
How can you edit it when there's different...
Well, it's funny because it sort of works, doesn't it? I mean, that was one of our main questions, is how the hell are we going to achieve any continuity? But because I think there was sort of enough audience members that they just seem a bit like, I mean, obviously when you can pick people out that it's different, but it just seems like this sort of layer of extras, really, in conventional film terms. So it just about cuts together. The committee scene is the one I noticed. The one where they're around the tables at the end, and then there's the bank of seats, like the press gallery. And you go from one shot, you go from one close-up of Ali, the actor, and you'll cut to the audience and there'll be one set of people sat there, and then you cut back and it's completely different. So, yeah, that was quite... But again, that's actually testament to Colin. That's where an editor is worth their weight in gold, you know. It's because they know when it matters and when it doesn't matter. They know when you'll actually notice and when you won't notice. So it's really clever the way they've got an instinct, really, a good one, House anyway.
I liked how when you describe the actual process of filming, you describe it as like a machine in the sense of it all being very planned out and set out, and the experience of the live event is also quite unpredictable. And were there any things that actually took place that were, because of having the live audience, were there any unpredictable moments of it, or the moments that kind of felt like you needed to leave space for contingency of what could happen?
Yeah, I think there could have been more space for that, actually. There was some space for it. So one of the things we were really interested in is once you invite an audience in and essentially treat them as extras. I don't know if any of you have ever been an extra, but you really do. You get herded around, right? And I mean, they're not awful to you. Sometimes they're a bit awful to you, but you'll have the, 26th AD, assistant director, who will be in charge of you for the day, and you'll get sort of, shipped from place to place. And we wanted a little bit of that, without being sort of horrible to people. We're getting chucked out. We wanted a little bit of that. And that was slightly unpredictable, is the way the audience reacted to that sort of direction, So we did, and because we were very conscious of, it was a real time constraint, but we also quite wanted that to be very present in the room. So we were ushering them to get to the next set quickly and to sit down and move out of the way. And then there were these big pieces of equipment that get pushed through the crowds, So all of that felt quite live and sort of not possible to choreograph. And a lot of the film is that, like those machine bits, those in-between bits, they probably make up, I don't know, like over a half anyway of the film. So, yeah, I mean, and Nick, actually, a big part of this for me is the soundtrack. He really responded to that machine idea and kind of embraced it in his composition. So you get these slightly industrial noises and strange crescendos. That's one of my favourite bits of the soundtrack, is when it crescendos up with this machine noise to the beginning of a scene, to action, and then it cuts out. It's just sort of the opposite of what you would.
Were there sounds present in the space?
No, that's the soundtrack. Yeah, which again is part of it becoming this other thing, this artifact, this sort of finished thing. And the actors that was quite a live relationship with the audience for the actors. So, are we up against it? Or? Yeah, I think so. Okay. That's fine. Thank you. Thanks for coming and watching. Yes.